Shocking details just released are shedding light on what led up to a Minnesota man allegedly poisoning his wife. In newly released documents, more than a dozen search warrant applications indicated suspicion from Betty Bowman's loved ones that she died of mysterious circumstances and not a natural death as previously suggested by her husband Connor Bowman to authorities. Dr. Connor Bowman is accused of slipping medicine used to treat gout inside the smoothie of his wife, Betty Bowman. Officials say Betty was admitted into a Minnesota hospital for severe stomach distress and dehydration. Shortly after being admitted, her health deteriorated rapidly. Officials reveal Betty died from colchicine poisoning, a drug commonly used to treat gout.
Probably be pretty scary to go through something like that.
Dr. Mary Jumbulik is a former chief medical examiner of Onondaga County. She tells me colchicine itself is not a common drug, but once increased doses are in the body, the effects can be fatal.
It's an old drug, but it is used to treat gout, which is an inflammation in the feet, usually the big toes, and it is also treated for Mediterranean hemorrhagic fever, but not widely used. It is easily absorbed by mouth, and the effects it has range from very early on, 1 to 10 hours after ingestion, you get a lot of GI symptoms. So nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, that type of thing. And then within 24 to 72 hours, your body starts to shut down and the organs start to fail. So the kidneys, the liver, the heart, and that's when it leads into severe complications and ultimately, if that goes on, death. I don't know about the taste of the colchicine, but I do know that it has a very narrow therapeutic index. And what that means is a little bit is helpful in the gout situation, but a little bit more can be fatal. So it's not as if it takes a huge amount to be poisonous.
Authorities noted the medical examiner report for Betty's initial symptoms were similar to food poisoning, which the doctors treated as such.
I think the GI system is a very sensitive system, and there's a rapid turnover of cells in the lining. And so it is often the harbinger of many types of diseases, whether it's simple, uncomplicated food poisoning, or it's something more sinister like actual poisoning intentionally by someone. So it's often what we see first as a sign of, it's very non-specific, and you can see it in many circumstances. So it could have been thought of as food poisoning.
Dr. Jumbulik says once the drug was in Betty's system, she had a short time frame before the effects would have amplified.
It has a really narrow therapeutic index, and what that means is a little bit of it's okay to treat gout on a regular basis, but a little bit more than that, and you can suffer a poisoning. It might not be fatal, but you might get very sick and need support at the hospital. So it would have an acute presentation when too much of it is given, and it doesn't take a lot.
Court documents go on to state Betty experienced cardiac issues, fluid in her lungs. She had to have part of her colon removed and eventually died from organ failure, just mere days after being admitted into the hospital. But according to new documents, Betty's friends sounded the alarm to authorities shortly after her death. In 13 search warrants filed in the murder investigation, multiple people close to the couple reported to Rochester police they thought Connor acted strangely after Betty's death. According to the search warrant applications, friends of the couple reported marital issues between the two. Friends of Betty and Connor told investigators the couple were in an open relationship and had an agreement they would have sexual relationships with other individuals as long as their relationship with each other was the only emotional connection they had. However, Connor was reportedly developing an emotional connection with a woman identified as Belle. The friends say Betty confronted Connor and suggested they begin divorce proceedings if Connor would choose Belle over Betty. Another friend reported to police that Betty learned Connor had a significant amount of debt that he was trying to hide from Betty. That same friend reported another red flag to investigators, that Connor had not shown any grief after Betty's death and even invited friends out for drinks 2 days after Betty's death, appearing happy. Then another friend of Betty's told police she visited her less than a week before Betty was admitted to the hospital. Betty asked her to try a smoothie Connor had reportedly given to her, Once the friend tasted it, she noticed a very bad taste, described in the search warrant as bitter and salty and not like a smoothie would be expected to taste. At the time, the friend did not think much of it and even joked with Betty that Connor must be trying to poison her. The friend also thought it was strange for Connor to even make a smoothie for Betty because, quote, he never made anything for anybody. Another shocking claim. One witness told police they believed Connor would have done something to Betty even without any suspected motives because his demeanor was just that he didn't care. And just 3 days after Betty died, Connor was at home with another woman and the photos of Betty had been taken down. A friend of Connor's from the Mayo Clinic told police Connor had received $500,000 in life insurance for Betty's death. Upon learning of Betty's sudden illness, admission into the hospital, and eventual death, Connor's friends told investigators his suspicions arose, seeing as Betty had no previous medical history. He also thought the fact that Connor was a pharmacist with a history of working in poison control was concerning, because Connor would have had knowledge about hazardous substances and would know what would be screened for in an autopsy. Connor's friends also told investigators Connor had asked him to go into Betty's medical chart to see if he could identify another opinion on the cause of Betty's illness, but refused because it would be considered a HIPAA violation. More suspicion grew when Connor told family and friends Betty might have a rare illness known as HLH, which seemed odd because according to Connor's friends, that disease is hereditary and usually presents in children at a younger age due to complications, which Betty did not have a history of. Connor included HLH as Betty's cause of death in her obituary, despite Betty's test results coming back inconclusive for HLH. Dr. Mary Jumbelik says Connor may have suggested HLH as the cause of Betty's untimely death because it's difficult to diagnose.
I suppose he suggested hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis as a disease because it's very rare. And perhaps many of the symptoms and the signs that she was expressing at the hospital could be explained by a rare disease that is difficult to diagnose because it means the immune system isn't working properly, and all of those things that we see, the liver failure, the kidney failure, the infection, the heart failure, might be explained by a system that is just suddenly crashing. And because it can also be triggered by a virus, such as an infection like Epstein-Barr or something else, perhaps he just thought that would encompass all of her symptomatology at the hospital and might be an explanation that wouldn't be easy to be checked.
According to the search warrant, Connor made disturbing searches prior to Betty's death, including searches for lethal doses of colchicine, specifically the effects it would have on someone weighing 120 pounds, which was approximately Betty's weight. The report adds purchases of the drug were made around the beginning of August. Previous court documents released say Connor tried to stop the medical examiner from doing Betty's autopsy, arguing Betty's death was natural and his wife wished not to be a cadaver. Dr. Jumbelik says Betty's autopsy is critical in the investigation.
Any type of, toxicology has gotten better and better for screening, but when it's very specific pharmaceutical drugs, often you do have to specifically look for something. And in this case, she got sick on the 16th of August and then she died on the 20th. So already a few days have gone by before the medical examiner is even involved in the case. And the effects of the poisoning on the body would look very similar to just all the organs are failing. And so you're looking for the cause of that. The autopsy is demonstrating, well, there's no other natural disease process that we see going on. Let's look at the investigation. Let's look at the hospital information. So I don't have the hospital records. I don't know what the clinicians thought as she came into the hospital or how they progressed through those days of her suffering. But at some point, someone had the wherewithal to save the hospital specimens of the blood drawn from her while she was alive. And that's critical to this case, because if no one had saved any specimens and the autopsy is done 4 days later, you might not have even been able to pick it up. Well, I think it's important to realize that the medical examiner did stop the cremation from taking place. So apparently, and again, I don't have the original records, but apparently the next of kin, the husband, did not want an autopsy to take place. And the medical examiner saw through that and decided that it was needed in this case. So whatever concerns a 32-year-old woman, otherwise healthy, no past medical history, no obvious cause, but presents with this catastrophic acute illness, saw the need, to investigate from the medical examiner's perspective. So that was, kudos on them for doing the right thing. And the friends may have talked to police and had some concerns, but all the scientific evaluation was done properly too. So the full autopsy, and then get the specimens from the hospital and do the testing for toxicology and really try to find out what happened to this woman that she just presented so sick and died 4 days later with no underlying, medical problem. So I think, who knows if it would have been determined as quickly as it was. I think 2 month turnaround time for toxicology, a total thorough evaluation. That's pretty good, because sometimes it can go much longer than that. So I think that is really good. Who knows how long it would have taken them to get to the colchicine, but they might have gotten there.
Betty's death was ruled a homicide on October 20th, nearly 2 months after Betty was first admitted into the hospital. Connor was arrested that same day. He continues to be held behind bars, charged with second-degree murder. Connor Bowman is still behind bars, being held on a conditional $2 million bail. His next scheduled court appearance is slated for January 16th. Reporting for Law&Crime Network, I'm Elizabeth Millner.